Every year I've been putting in more and more fruit trees, but one of my latest things I've been trying to do is actually blending fruit trees directly into the garden from this 2-in-1 pear here or this 3-in-1 low chill plum. So today, let's talk about how to actually put fruit trees in your garden, some mistakes that a lot of people make or even don't realize that they're making, and how to avoid it. Let's talk about problems and mistakes that are very typical for a lot of beginner growers. Let's take a look underneath this paver where you'll see a major one. Right here is a fruit tree root. This fruit tree is actually from the white mulberry. So the previous homeowners decided it was a good idea to put this mulberry tree here, and that's a very bad idea. Mulberry trees have very invasive roots, which means that they will spread very aggressively. They will upheave your pavers, ruin your entire patio. They can break into sewer lines and even damage the foundation of your house. So this tree is probably not going to be here for long. We didn't put it in here. We just have to accept that it's already here. Another tree you have to watch out for in particular is the fig tree. Fig trees or ficuses have very aggressive roots. You'll see them all across the cities, ruining sidewalks. So make sure that if you put them somewhere, they're not near a structure, they're not near something that's going to get damaged. But there is something you could do, even if it is a tree that you like, and it actually has to do with the rootstock. So right here we have 2 apple trees, and the rootstock is a secret weapon, which means that I could plant these wherever I want. Right behind me here is an evergreen tree, a citrus. This is a gigantic calamandine, aka calamansi, very delicious, but the point here is that it's an evergreen tree, which means that the leaves will never drop. These leaves are here year-round, and that can actually make a really big difference depending on where you place it, because those leaves will block the sun year-round. Now, all the trees that I'm putting in today are deciduous, which means that the leaves will drop at winter time or at the end of the fall. So we will be talking about why I chose them and how they're going to be placed once we do the layout. But first, we have to clean up the whole area where I'm planning on putting these trees. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you might recognize this over here as my asparagus patch, but look at it closely. You might notice that there's only a single asparagus plant left. I don't know what happened. I don't know if they got some sort of rot disease, maybe a bunch of grubs infested it, ate all the roots, but they're not here anymore. They're gone. I'm ready to walk away because just having one plant is not making me happy. So I will in the future build a separate asparagus bed dedicated to that, but this is going to be where the trees live. Now, if you look around, you'll notice that it is a little bit overgrown. So we're gonna do some cleanup here, remove some of these plants, cut back some of this Pride Madeira, and get it ready for some tree planting. All the weeds are cleared and we're ready to start planting trees. So let's quickly talk about the trees that I'm going to be putting in. The first 2 over here are bare root trees. So right now I just took them out of a pot where I was healing them in, because when you get bare root trees and you're not planting them right away, you do want to put them in either some wet wood chips or some soil just to keep them alive. And then before you plant them, you want to soak them in some water for at least an hour. Now these 2 apples are Fuji and Pink Lady. Both of these are actually a little bit high on the chill hours recommendation for my area, but I've heard rumors that these 2 trees in particular seem to produce well even in lower chill zone areas. So I'm gonna test it out and you guys will definitely find out in maybe 2 years. Now, the other thing I wanna mention is that these are both grafted trees. Most trees that you buy are grafted. So you can see this point down here that's swollen and then a new branch comes out. This is the graft point. So down here is a rootstock. In this case, both of these are on a G11 rootstock, which is a dwarf rootstock. That's a very important thing to remember. If you wanna plant trees next to structures like a wall or a retaining wall like that over there, make sure they are a dwarf or even semi-dwarf rootstock you can get away with. And that is because dwarf rootstock trees will also have dwarf roots. These roots are not very powerful. They're brittle, they can break easily. So when they hit a wall, they're not gonna push their way through. They're just going to break instead and they're not gonna cause any major damage. So if you do wanna plant near structures, dwarf rootstock is what you want. And when you're choosing apples, you wanna make sure that they could pollinate each other. Both of these are compatible with each other, so one pollinates the other, and that'll make sure that you actually get a good amount of fruit. Now on this side, we're going to be putting in a pomegranate, which actually is right over here. This is the Parfianca pomegranate, apparently one of the most delicious. And actually it also is listed as one that crops heavily. So that's what I'm looking for. I want a pomegranate that actually produces. And very exciting moment here, because down here is actually a Texas pink pomegranate. The exciting thing about this is that this is from our new offering on epicgardening.com. We are starting to sell live goods. This is such a beautiful tree. When it came in, I was actually shocked by how good it looked and how big it was. This is a 5-gallon pomegranate. If I get one fruit this year, I wouldn't be surprised just because of how big it is. Let's go over the rough layout of these trees. Remember, I have a wall right here and a wall right here. So what I've done is I've come 2 feet in from either side. It's not because I'm worried about the wall, because remember, this is a dwarf tree. I'm just wanting to give it as much soil as I possibly can. From that, I'm gonna go 4 feet to this stake over here. That's gonna be apple tree number 2. 4 feet is probably the minimum I would say, unless you're going for a 2 tree in 1 hole situation. This should be great, especially for dwarf trees that you're going to be pruning every single year to maintain the height. Now when it comes to pomegranates, pomegranates can be grown as a low shrub instead of a tree. That's one of the nice things about them is they produce many branches. They're not grafted. They don't have very invasive roots from the get-go. So I'm going to be putting it just another 4 feet away, which is actually right where it is right now. And then this bigger tree that's going to have to fight for a little bit more sun over here. Since it's a bigger tree, I'm not worried about it. It's gonna go right in the ground here. It's gonna have plenty of height to already establish itself, and it'll do really, really well here. So that's the idea. We're going to be planting these in the simple way, not the complicated multi-year hole way that I've showed you guys before, but just the guaranteed simple way to plant a tree, whether it's a bare root or something already in a pot. We're going to start with the pomegranates because I am still soaking those apple trees, but I wanted to clarify something. The trees that we're selling direct to you guys are potted. They're not bare root trees, so they could go straight in the ground. This one is in this container now because I actually planted it somewhere else. Changed my mind when I came up with this master plan. So you might see a little bit of clay soil on top. That's not how it ships, just to clear that up. What we're going to do here is just mark the rough area where this pot is. Then I'll move it aside and we're gonna get digging. This is going to be a pretty big hole since it is a 5-gallon pot tree. So let's see how long this takes. I have the hole roughly close to the size I think this pot is. So let's do a little dry fit here. Dry fit meaning I'm not gonna take the pot off. Actually, this pot isn't filled all the way. It's right about here. So I think that's actually the perfect height. Let's go ahead and put this in the ground. Before we put it in the ground though, one thing I will do, which is probably recommended for anyone across the board, is if you're digging a round hole, the chances of root spiraling increase apparently. So what I'm going to do instead, just take my shovel here and just chop into the side of this hole. That way, if the roots do spiral, they'll hit those chops and they'll hopefully dig into the side instead of just lossing around the edges here. I'm going to try to just tip this pot and pull the tree out and plop it right in the ground. Usually that works for me. If the tree is stuck though, you can hit the sides like this, but I know that I replanted this myself, so I know it's not seated in this pot very well. So this is actually the size of the root ball you're going to get when shipped to you. I put it in this container as a holding ground when I moved it. So we'll see how it actually fits in here. I might have gone a little bit too deep. So one thing that I personally believe in is compacting your soil. If you dug it out, I don't want this tree to settle any more than it has to. So by pressing it down a little bit, I'm gonna solve a little bit of settling issue that a lot of people have. So there we go. Now we could go ahead and backfill this entirely. The idea when you're planting a tree is to make sure that it's not sitting in a bunch of air. You want it to actually be sitting in soil. So once we're done planting this tree at least roughly in, I'm gonna grab the hose and we're gonna trickle a ton of water in here while we plant the others. This next pomegranate is going to be the same deal, except it's a much smaller pot, so I don't have to dig a big hole. So same idea, just dig a hole slightly bigger than the pot that it was originally in and backfill it in. That's 2 pomegranates in the ground ready to grow. And just to give you a little bit of context, a 5-gallon tree like that, this one will probably catch up to look just like that next year. So you're buying about a year every time you go up in pot size. Just keep that in mind if you're a patient grower. You can go smaller, but the bigger you go, you're buying back time and you're gonna get fruit a little bit sooner. Now we're getting into the bare root planting. Now this is going to be as simple as I could possibly make it. We're just going to dig a hole deep enough for the bare root. That's it, and I'll show you how to backfill those roots to make sure they succeed, get plenty of soil interaction with those roots. So the first tree is gonna go right here. Should be a pretty easy hole since it's just a bare root, it doesn't have a root ball really. But let's just go ahead and make it nice and accommodating. So this is a pink lady, one of my favorite apples. I'm very excited for that. And this guy is the Fuji. So a couple of things I'm looking at here. First of all, this has almost no branching. It's just a whip, basically. That's what it's called. It's just a stick that goes straight up. Whereas this one actually has some branching, which is really nice. My thought here is that I'm going to be putting the nicer branching further back where maybe the sun is a little bit more challenging. I don't want to stress out this single stick any more than I have to. So I'm gonna give it as much sun as I possibly can. It's gonna go into the fuller sun location and I'll plant this pink lady a little bit further back. So here's the basic anatomy of the bare root tree. This is the graft point here. And down here, this is all the actual rootstock. Take a look at the highest root you could find. These are like bracing roots. This root here should be basically at the surface, essentially just barely buried, and that's it. So that's going to be our burial point, wherever that braced root is. So here is that bracing root I was talking about, and here's my hand. You can see I'm barely above it. So what we're going to do here is crumble the soil as we backfill, because the important thing here is that we make sure that all these roots are surrounded by soil and not air. That's the most critical thing. want to pay attention to when you're planting a bare root. Everything after that is secondary, because if you leave an air pocket up against these roots, they're just going to rot. They're not going to actually survive and turn into more roots. That's the most critical thing you could think of, really. So as I'm filling, I'm also going to be basically getting my hand in there, compressing like this with my fingers to make sure that these roots are seated, that there's, again, no air, and that all the soil is settling nicely. So one thing I'm going to do now is pour a little bit of water in here, and that's going to help those soil settle around the roots even more. It's not going to really drain well right now since I just dug it up, but I do feel much better knowing that that water is definitely part of the soil now. I'm going to leave that to drain in some of that water, and we're going to move on to the next tree here. So same idea, what I did here, I'm going to do over there, exact same process. All 4 trees are now planted, potted, bare root. Now you can see the difference. The last thing to do is to actually cut away some of these apple trees. With the pomegranates, I don't need to do any pruning right now. They started to leaf out. They will get pruning later in the year, probably at the end of summer, just to keep their height down. But for the apple tree, what I want to do here is actually bring the height down. I don't want this to be a gigantic tree. I want it to be a very manageable backyard tree that won't shade the garden too much. So I have this bud right here will be the new master bud, basically. So come in at a 45-degree angle. Boom, that's gone. Don't worry about it. The goal is to build the structured tree you want, not keep the tree that you got when you purchased it. So don't feel bad about the price there. So now I'm going to try to match these heights. This already has a lot more vigor with the branches. So I want to keep this, 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 and this. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it right there. Already I have a pretty good structure here. I'm very happy with that. The last thing to do for every one of these trees is to actually give it some fertilizer. It could be any organic fertilizer you have on hand. This is the one I've been going through right now, but they're all totally fine. You don't have to get a specific fancy one. Just want an organic balanced fertilizer, because organic fertilizer slowly releases every time you water. So each one of these trees is going to get a hearty dose right around the base, including the pomegranates, just like that. This is going to give it all the initial nutrients it needs to put out plenty of root growth, plenty of green growth, because that's what we're focusing on in the first year. We want to establish as much root mass as possible. The last thing I'm going to do here is actually go ahead and bury this all with wood chips. Each tree is probably going to get, maybe not quite that much, basically 1 full bucket of these. And I'm going to fill in all the area around it. Now the thing I'm not going to do is put it up right against the base of the root there. I want to leave a little bit of breathing room for that tree so we're not suffocating it in mulch, just like that. But the rest, you want a very deep pocket of wood chip mulch. That's going to lock all that moisture in. And speaking of moisture, what you want to do after you plant those trees is take your hose and leave it at the base of each tree for at least half an hour. This slow trickle is going to infiltrate deep into the earth. Make sure all those air pockets around the roots are gone, and ensure that that tree is going to get all the water it needs for that initial root growth. It has been 3 weeks since we put in this mini orchard directly in my garden, and I want to give you guys a couple updates on how it's growing. The first thing I see on the big 5-gallon pomegranate that we put in is that it is starting to develop flowers. I see one over here, a double over here, so I'm very excited because that means that I'm going to be leaving these. There's no way I'm thinning fruit. I want to get the fruit right away as soon as possible, especially on a tree that's already this big. I'm not too worried about it. For the little guy, I'm not expecting fruit, and I probably will remove flowers just because it's so small. I want to focus on growing rather than actually fruiting. The nice thing that I see though is right here, we have a bunch of new growth, which looks very shiny, small leaves. So I know that it's at least alive and it is putting out new growth, which is fantastic. Now, when it comes to the apples, it's kind of interesting because the pink lady apple seems to be growing much more vigorously. It already has leaves fully opened and revealed, and it's even starting to open up some flowers. Now, when it comes to the fruits on this, I will be actually plucking off these flowers. I don't want this to be focusing on growing any flowers because this was a bare root tree. You saw how many roots it has. It basically has like 5 little root chunks and that's it. It does not need to be putting any energy into fruit production at this point in the year. I just want it to grow, and that's it. And next year, maybe I'll let 1 or 2 apples sneak by. Now the Fuji apple is the one that we gave the most severe haircut. So let's take a look at that. What I'm seeing here is really good signs. I have a new growth here, here, up here, and behind me that's facing me. So I'm going to have a nice 4-way branching structure. I even have some leafing forming lower down on the tree. The main thing I'm really looking at here is that every single one of these trees is alive and well. It's starting to grow and they look quite happy. The last important thing I really wanted to mention here is that the 4 trees that I put directly in my garden near my vegetable growing area are deciduous trees. So all the leaves will drop come wintertime towards even the end of fall. And as the sun gets lower on the horizon in the wintertime, that sun's going to be blocked by everything on this side. So I don't want any leaves blocking the light from entering into my winter garden, where I want to be growing tons of winter vegetables. So when you are planning on putting in a little mini orchard, either in your yard or in your garden, try to think about whether it's evergreen, whether it's deciduous, how it'll interplay with the rest of your garden. And just know, after watching this video, you could see this was a very simple planting technique. Every tree made it. They look very happy and healthy. And that's all it is to it. It's very simple to grow trees. You just have to put them in and just wait patiently until you get that delicious fruit. So check out the offerings that we have down in the description below. Thanks for watching, and any questions about growing fruit trees or anything I might have missed, please put them down in the comments. I'd love to hear it.